Reimagining Valkyries in Fantasy Fiction, The Legacy of Brynhild. A story is an artifact that can last longer than flesh, wood, and cloth, as long as it is told. The tales of the Norse gods and goddesses have been revised, adapted, and modified for centuries, transferring from their oral tradition to being printed on paper and into a variety of modern artistic mediums, such as video games, comics, films, TV series, to name a few. The medium which still suits them today is books, particularly those written as fantasy fiction. The mythological partners successfully with the genre of fantasy. Fantasy enables authors to write stories inspired and influenced by the original characters and contexts. Fantasy fiction also allows authors to give voices to new narrators and realign these ancient stories with themes and issues in the 21st century. The Poetic Edda, the source of many of the core stories, has inspired fresh tales of the pantheon. I personally have read over 100 titles to date which feature characters, animals, items, or settings from Norse mythology in the genre of fantasy. Myths about the goddesses as individuals are few. They are often featured as secondary characters with minor roles and dialogue. This is reflected in the number of fantasy novels with female protagonists from Norse mythology. The few contemporary retellings I have identified are worth noting because of the diverse nature of their female protagonists. In them, readers will find representations of giants, Norns, and witches, alongside the more recognisable goddess Freya and the lesser-known goddess Hel. There is one type of female character from Norse mythology who is often present in fantasy fiction. That is the Valkyrie. 14% of the titles I have read have a Valkyrie as the protagonist character. Lindsay Williams's article in Ex Historia, Volume 11, 2019, demonstrates how interpretation inspires and evolves future interpretations. This continuous cycle explains why each Valkyrie character in fantasy fiction is unique. They are not all the same. The variety of her aesthetics to her supernatural abilities is because the Valkyrie as a character has no canonical definition, granting her an extremely malleable form and making her multifaceted. She has the ability to be reshaped to reflect the influences of the time and be placed in limitless contexts. Williams studied representations of the Valkyrie in 19th century art, 20th century cartoons, and 21st century films. The one medium she does not analyse for Valkyrie archetypes is popular or genre fiction. There is a gap in this rainbow spectrum of research on the perception of Valkyries in the 21st century that I would like to illuminate for you all today. I will focus on one Valkyrie character, who is perhaps the founding stereotype of modern conceptions. Brynhild, the Valkyrie. Her fame owes much to Richard Wagner, who, inspired by the saga of the Volsungs, wrote During the Nibelungen cycle of operas, which were first staged in 1876 and is still performed to sell-out audiences in theatres across the world over 1.5 centuries later. Siren Findle's master's thesis research, 2019, explored the importance of Brynhild as a Valkyrie figure. She did a character analysis using the concept of a story world to unite the extant Old Norse manuscripts that relate to the saga of the Volsungs and to Brynhild. I performed a literary analysis of 3 contemporary fantasy titles, to identify how the character of Brynhild the Valkyrie and events from the Volsung Saga are retained or adapted in the concept of the narrative world. Today I will share with you a few select findings, and the surprising detail I found that all three authors have interpreted differently. I would also like to issue a spoiler warning, as context is essential for understanding. Brynhild 2.0. Dead Radiance by T.J. Ayer 2012 breaks away from the traditional narrative by setting her narrative world in the 20th century, with the prologue depicting the discovery of an ancient Norse burial of a female in Sweden. The significance of this burial is not that it is of a woman, but that she appears to have wings. For the sake of the entire plot, the skeletal remains are in good enough condition for a certain geneticist to collect samples. This Dr. Halbrook goes on to blend the ancient Valkyrie DNA with that of his wife and himself through in vitro fertilization treatment, creating the protagonist, who is a hybrid, not a clone, of a historical Brynhild. The teenage girl who grows up from that illegal experiment goes on to prove she is a near-perfect replica in terms of appearance and abilities, as witnessed by other characters and shown through narrative events in the novel. In this narrative world, Ayer modifies and rearranges details from the traditional saga. At the start, historical Brynhild is found buried, albeit with wings, which is in stark opposition to her familiar death on the pyre. More significant alterations become apparent when a Valkyrie in the modern present threatens hybrid Brynhild because historical Brynhild stole her boyfriend. The boyfriend in question is not Sigurd, as expected, but surprisingly Gunnar. This pairing of characters does not match with the saga of the Volsungs. Gunnar is the only other character referenced from the original saga in the entire novel, yet the love affair with Gunnar is described poetically as befitting a romantic tragedy, where the couple face some type of threat to their relationship. Described as obstacles, it is frustratingly vague as to what those obstacles were, so it is hard to suggest what they may have been. Readers will also learn that Brynhild was sent to Earth, otherwise known as Midgard, on a quest to recover Freya's lost Brisingamen amber necklace, which again does not reflect with the traditional banishment for disobeying Odin. Supporting characters also discuss the potential that hybrid Brynhild is in fact reincarnated, by referring to another Valkyrie who was reincarnated in this narrative world, a Valkyrie called Kara, who supposedly returned in her third lifetime. This could be a link to the second poem of Helgi Hundingsbane, set in a previous era in the broader saga narrative within the Poetic Edda, where a Valkyrie named Sigrun falls in love with a mortal warrior prince called Helgi. After Helgi dies in battle and Sigrun dies from grief, the saga poet comments about the old wives' tale from pagan times about reincarnation of the pair, with Sigrun returning with the new name of Kara Halfdan's daughter, and states that she too was a Valkyrie. The narrator of the poem directs readers to the Song of Kara, a forever lost text, sadly. Brynhild as cultural memory. The Strange Maid by Tessa Gratton 2014 is one of a trilogy set in an alternative present, the difference being that the Norse were successful when settling across North America, forming the United States of Asgard. The Norse faith system is superior amongst the population, and the gods, and in particular the Valkyries, are corporeal and active in society, politics and religion. In this narrative world, Brynhild forms part of the collective memory and inherited legacy of the Order of the Valkyries. The legend of Brynhild has lasted throughout this alternative timeline, through the retention of its oral form as cultural poetry. This becomes evident in a scene quite early on in the book, where the protagonist, Signy Valborn, the first unproven Valkyrie for 100 years, is discovered planning the hanging of a prisoner on death row. Her fellow Valkyries are shocked at and fearful of her misguided actions. Quoting, "Siri of the Ice hissed a line of poetry about Brynhild, who was cursed for disobeying the Allfather." End quote. Such is the strength of fear for Signy that at least one Valkyrie instantly recalls what happened to Brynhild when she transgressed against Odin. In other chapters of the novel, Signy Valborn goes on to make references to the wider saga of the Volsungs, such as in a fighting match, a poetic exchange of witty insults. She names Sigurd the Dragon Slayer and Fafnir, and she also recites lines from the saga related to her namesake, Signy Volsung. Returning to that earlier scene, a Kara Neverborn is named by the elder Valkyries in relation to Signy's dangerous actions and the dire consequences. Gratton, too, is making use of the second poem of Helgi Hundingsbane, embedding the reincarnated Sigrun, now known as Kara Neverborn, into the narrative world as another example of Odin using discipline against the Valkyries. In this case, because Kara defected from Odin in the alternative US Civil War over ending the use of slaves. For this offence, Odin, and I quote, "tore her name out of the world. No one knows her name but for her sister Valkyries." End quote. A punishment far crueler than what he did to Brynhild. It could perhaps be a creative way which Gratton acknowledges the lost text of the Song of Kara. The narrative world of the United States of Asgard has no record or memory of Kara existing. Equally, our own reality is sadly missing the same. Brynhild, the Revolutionary Heroine. The Valkyrie, by Kate Hartfield, 2023, uses the saga of the Volsungs as the main background context and expands the story of Brynhild. Many of the traditional saga events are retained, yet there are equally a number of differences. One important difference is that the story is told as a dual narrative, narrated by Brynhild and the Princess Sigrun. It is a surprising reflection of one interpretation of the legend depicted on the Overhogdal tapestries, for the Overhogdal tapestry version also focuses on the female heroes, Brynhild and Gudrun, in contrast to the focus granted to Sigurd in the manuscript. For today, I would like to highlight the most significant of scenes in this alternative version, for Hartfield has reimagined an alternative ending. When Brynhild and Sigurd, both now dead, reunite in Hel's Hall, Sigurd confirms to Brynhild her fears about Odin's hidden influence on events up to this point. Hel then sends Brynhild to Folkvang, home of the goddess Freya, and her Seer spirit maidens, who collect the other half of the dead from every battle. Brynhild turns to Freya for guidance on how to stop Odin's manipulations. When Freya confirms he is impossible to kill, Brynhild simply says, quote, "I don't want to kill him, but he's not the one who chooses the slain. Help me find the Valkyries and I will convince them to stop this." End quote. At this point, Brynhild realises the most overlooked truth about the Valkyries and their role. Odin may be able to trigger wars between kings and nations, but he himself does not visit the battlefield and collect the dead. They, the Valkyries, are the only beings who can recruit the dead for him and guide them to Valhalla. The Valkyries are in fact his weakest link as well as his greatest strength. Brynhild finds a way to reach her Valkyrie sisters in Midgard, arriving 10 years after her death on the pyre, and finds them entangled in the largest historical battle between the forces of the Holy Roman Empire and Attila leading the Huns. Brynhild proclaims the new Hall of Sigurd is now open, as a final destination for the dying and the dead, introducing a controversial third alternative in opposition to going to Valhalla with the Valkyries or going to Folkvang with the deter. Brynhild then gets attacked by a Valkyrie called Kara, who sees her as a traitor, not just to Odin, but the entire Valkyrie sisterhood. Hrist, another Valkyrie, halts this aggression towards Brynhild, and a seismic decision is made. Quoting, "We serve them," Hrist replied, gesturing at the field of broken bodies. "I haven't forgotten that, even if you have. If they wish to come to Valhalla, I will bring them their cup with great joy. If they wish to go to Brynhild's new place, then I won't be the one to stop them." In the response to Brynhild's return from apparent death and her actions of great consequence, Hrist is the Valkyrie that is emboldened to rewrite the balance of power and control in the relationship between Odin and the Valkyries. She reminds the other Valkyries that their duty to the dead takes precedence over any commands given by Odin. After the Valkyries abandon the battlefield with Brynhild, there is a tense scene with Odin requesting his Valkyries return to Valhalla with him. He is then strategically confronted not just by Brynhild, but also by Freya herself and Gudrun. It is a highly charged feminine opposition to an antagonistic patriarchal power. It is the Valkyrie Hrist who once again shows that Brynhild's actions and words have inspired a lasting legacy of change. "I'll return to Valhalla with him when he comes for me." Quoting from the book here, "I have a duty to the dead, and I have a duty to the new girls he will bring and train," meaning new Valkyries, "but I won't serve his whims any longer. If he brings me to Valhalla, he brings a revolt with him." End quote. In a poetic reflection of the film Spartacus, Brynhild's description of the status quo inspires her sisters. Her revolutionary acts enable the Valkyries to reclaim respect for the power and responsibility of their duty as choosers of the slain. So, in conclusion, in Dead Radiance by T.J. Ayer, Brynhild as a character is abstracted and displaced from her original source into a modern narrative world, and saga events are changed so much they are now foreign to familiar readers. This difference in context, though, enables hybrid Brynhild to make her own mark, independently of the past life with which she shares a name. Bryn can and does act as a genuine singular character, free of any expectation, shame and tragedy. In The Strange Maid by Tessa Gratton, Brynhild retains a taboo of shame and fear in this alternative present narrative world. This grants readers a unique, albeit prejudiced viewpoint from within the Order of the Valkyries, where memory of Brynhild's fall is firmly fixed by collective disgrace at her disobedience. They do not show any knowledge of the traditional saga details as to what occurred to Brynhild after she had been stripped of her position. In The Valkyrie by Kate Hartfield, Brynhild transforms from a traditional figure of tragedy and grief into a woman who is strong enough not just to fight Odin once but twice. This reimagining is balanced a version of Brynhild's individual experience in saga events and challenges and questions what has been told before, most significantly by repositioning Brynhild as the protagonist instead of Sigurd. One discovery from this initial research is the shadow of another Valkyrie, Sigrun, otherwise known as Kara, who originates from the second poem of Helgi Hundingsbane in the Poetic Edda. Kara's name is mentioned as a figure from the Valkyries' past in Dead Radiance and in The Strange Maid, and she makes a debut in the Valkyrie as a minor character. There is little evidence from which these authors can construct a solid, recognisable character due to the manuscript of Kara sadly being lost. The gap in knowledge, however, grants the authors the freedom to depict and position her as best fits their narrative events and narrative world history. It certainly gives pause for thought that if the lost manuscript Song of Kara survived, which Valkyrie would be most popular in modern minds? Brynhild or Kara? Perhaps even both. Thank you very much for listening to what is my debut paper. I'd be happy to answer any questions to the best of my knowledge and ability. Do add them in the comments down below. Please note down the sources I used for my initial research on this aspect of interpretation of Valkyries in fantasy fiction. You may be pleased to know that this isn't the first video I plan on making and releasing examining the interpretation and depiction of Valkyries in fantasy fiction. The adaptation of Brynhild, the most defining Valkyrie of all, is just the tip of this iceberg I intend to excavate fully. I have many more questions and more fantasy novels I would like to analyse, more research of traditional manuscripts and artefacts in the hope of finding answers, such as sources describe Valkyries as being both servers of ale and food in Odin's hall, Valhalla, and of being present in battle, making the name choosing the worthy and assigning victory. Is the traditional role and duty kept in modern Norse fantasy, or is it expanded? If it is expanded, what other abilities and roles are provided? Do they honour or connect with the traditional role and duty, or do they diversify that role in ways that challenge the sources? Do new abilities and duties reflect the world of the pantheon, the history of Norse culture, or are they more recognisable and relatable to modern readers? And how are Valkyries depicted choosing the slain? What abilities, devices or actions lead them to choose one from many dead? Is it predetermined, or do they actually exert active choice? And do new abilities and duties show feminism and women empowerment? Are Valkyries in fiction depicted as stereotypically beautiful visions, the more recent strong independent type? What impact has media influenced such depictions, such as opera, Wagner's Ring Cycle, Marvel's Ragnarok film, Valkyries in games and comics? And is there any evidence or references to beauty, independent nature, or further magical abilities/duties from sagas or eddas? How much has been created using artistic license and to meet a modern audience? Is the use of artistic license a further indication of the lack of the missing sagas and legends relating to female spirits and goddesses in the eddas? These and many more I plan on researching and producing a video series to share my findings. I hope you will join me for the next step on this journey of discovery on the figure who connects the gap between Midgard and Asgard, the Valkyries. Thank you very much again for listening.